Hello, guys. Hope you had a great weekend. Let me start the show here. It's been very funny to follow the threads online with you guys talking about the class. Um, yeah, I mean, I mentioned at the beginning that this would be a little bit advanced, but it's just like it's not just like being advanced. I think it's just like Paloma mentioned. It's just like very unusual. It's kind of like a weird kind of pipeline. I'm not gonna say weird. It's more like it gives you a lot of freedom. It's like it's just like instead of like following the pipeline in a company. It's just like stuff so back to back and weird. But yeah, mine I think you have a lot of freedom to just like add and do whatever the hell you want. So as I promised last week, we're gonna be talking about eyes today, and then of course like once we go through this entire thing and do some renders. I can go over again about the pores detail and stuff like that. I can show you the state of the current Stan Winston and how things look like right now. I've seen many of you guys adding the pores and everything, and they look good. It's just a matter of adding the variations. That's what's gonna make everything pop. It's just like if you look at the photographs, you're going to see some pores. A few of them might be a little deeper, and then you have the bumps, and you have like the irregular stuff underneath, So yeah, that's going to add a lot instead of like having this kind of mechanical kind of look to it. But yeah, we're going to go through all that stuff. So talking about eyes, I've seen like many different setups over the years about eyes. The best approaches for this or that, it's like what creates like a better effect at the end of the day. And then I think that the eyes that I create, they look pretty realistic, but again, it's just like in that spirit of it's realistic in a way that's kind of like it sells it, right? Like basically like you believe that that's kind of like a real thing. But if you look closely, I mean, like in terms of textures, is quite simple, right? Like this is all poly painted. I don't have like those crazy maps. I've seen like people using actually someone got like from actual eyeballs, like this texture with this super saturated red all the way around and all this stuff. And I don't have that, everything I do is basically like what I'm gonna be able to see, right? So I'm not gonna go crazy with the redness around there. So basically what I'm gonna see, even if I go up and down with the eyes, it should be something that it's limited. It's like you're not gonna show a whole lot more than this. Of course, you can go a little deeper and everything, but that's basically what I have in terms of painting. You see, like the model itself is quite simple. So I have like the veins in there, and of course, like ZBrush is this amazing thing, right? That you can actually sculpt and paint at the same time. So that's basically what I do. It was like I sculpt those wrinkles as I paint them, so with a low intensity and everything. So the model itself is not very complicated. In terms of the way that the eye actually works, right? Like in front of the iris, you have this lens, and it has to be completely clear, right? You don't want any bump in this area here, otherwise it's gonna look weird. So it has to be like perfectly like a mirror, right? And then everything else here is what's gonna add the realism, right? Like breaking up all the specular when the specular runs over those veins, right? It's gonna be very cool. The audio is okay, right? Camilo, is the audio okay? Yeah, awesome. Okay. I forgot to test it before. So, and then in terms of the iris, now that's the interesting thing, right? Because the iris, if you look at some of the references online, you're gonna find all kinds of irises. There is no like way for you to come up with like with an average kind of iris, right? I'm gonna just bring up some images in here. Let me see if I can find some references I was looking before. So I have a bunch in here. This stuff is what I had like in my when I went to São Paulo last year, actually, for a workshop that I did. And I was talking about those, So you see like those references you can find online if you look like for macro photography of eyes or something like that. And it almost looks fake, It looks like this leathery kind of, there is not a lot of specular going on in there. It's kind of like opaque, right? But it has, it always has depth. So like all those little caves and everything, when the light hits it, and of course, like you're gonna need like some caustics to get like the real look to the eye, right? You're gonna observe like there's always caustic coming through. And in terms of, it's like it's very fibrous. You're gonna find out that sometimes when it's like a blue eye, it has more of this tiny little streaks, right? Like it goes like it has those tiny little rays in there, like with the light eyes, like that. But then sometimes when you get more towards the brown eyes, the structure is a little bit more rough. That's kind of like the average that I found, it's like it's kind of like it's a little bit more rough in terms of the detail, right? But then as you get a little bit lighter, it gets more and more fibrous apparently. Yeah, you can see here like the zigzag, right? It's kind of like it's it looks like more complex. But in my case here, I mean, like I use the same one for everyone and I just colorize them. In this case here, it's a blue eye. You see there's a lot of tiny effects and that type of things. You can actually do a little bit of that with texture if you want to. But I try to use as little texture as possible. So again, this one here, light eye, right? Like very tiny little fibers. And then as soon as I click like any brown eye here, it's a little bit less, It's like this one, it's hard to see, but it's almost like I said, it's kind of like, it's a different kind of character to it, right? This one is pretty cool, those fibers. So, I mean, like you can get like a much better result than I had in there if you want to go really crazy and pick one of those. And in my case here, I sculpted this one. There is a, let me see if I can find it. There is actually, I forgot to look at this before. So let's pretend. So let's see, where did I put this one? It was, where is it? Let's see. So I was, the R's, I think is under this folder here. Let's see. So Kris, personal projects. Let's try and see if it's in there somewhere in movies, if we have movies. Yeah, this one here. So I can just basically like speed up, I guess. I can just like show you guys and just speed up. So this one here, for example. This is like a sped up version of it, how I sculpted it. There is no rule. I mean, like I said, it's just a matter of like observing and trying to capture some of that. I think the most important part is to actually get those little caves deep enough because you want to get the light to really travel and go inside of them. And you see I sculpted everything. It's asymmetrical. I started symmetrically with the radial symmetry for the inner stuff. And then each one of those now are going to start to propagate those little lines and then build those little, I call them the little garage. You know, that it looks like a little garage in there. So it's kind of like, it's kind of wavy. Looks like a ruffles, right? And then some bumpiness I added later. But it's just a matter of like really capturing the depth of those things. In terms of the fibers, like I said, there's all kinds of variations. You can get like much thinner detail than I did here. But in my case, that's basically what I did. It's like I got one of those macro photography pictures and then I started exercising, just like cranking this. Probably it took me like, I would say like 45 minutes, maybe an hour to crank something and then detail a little bit further. So I don't know, like a total is not much longer than that. So as everything I'm teaching you here in this class, I'm teaching you the principle, how I approach those things. But it's not like I spend like days and days and days like sculpting a single piece, So everything here has a lot of room for you guys to improve. I mean, like the pores, you have room to improve it, do a better job than I did. Like iris, same thing, It's like, so you guys are totally free to kick my ass with this stuff. Eventually, I'm gonna revisit some of this stuff and maybe like trying to improve them and put some more time. We saw those renders over the weekend. I posted, and I'm gonna be talking about this after we talk about the eyes. I'm gonna be talking what changes I did in here and how I approached the surface, and I'm gonna show the model as well. And even the HDRI map I'm using for this scene here, that's pretty cool. It's from HDRI Haven, which is the site that I point you guys to. So that's the man in there. So let's go back in here. So looking at the iris, I mean, like it's not like I can teach you, okay, let's sculpt this from scratch right now because you would take me the entire lesson, right? But you can look at my Instagram. This one was posted, a little video in there, and you can go through and see how I approach the forms. But what I'm trying to say is just, it's just a matter of getting enough depth. If I do a render right here, You see, like you get the light to travel and go inside of those little pockets, and that's important. Looking from the side right here, you're gonna see how deep they are. So those little caves, right? But at the same time, to capture this in displacement map, how are you gonna do this? I mean, like there's a lot of ins and outs, unless you do like a 3D displacement, basically, like right, one of those crazy color displacement maps, the vector displacements. You're gonna have to actually export a fairly high resolution mesh back to Maya if you don't want to use the vector displacement, and that's basically what I did. So in this case here, the model itself, you see it's ending at 852,000 polys, right? So if I show you the base meshing here, it's just a disk, right? There is no necessity of having like a full-on globe in there, like I did in the past. I would have like the full globe with just with the iris right in front. But in this case here, what I need is basically just the iris and an area of buffer, those little 3 edges in here, for me to blend with the eyeball, right? Because the way I do it, it's just like I only use like 3 objects. One is just the little lens that goes inside. That's not important at all. It's just like to cover and make like a black hole in there. The other one is the iris. That's this object, which is a disk. Very low res. You can see like 849 polygons. But then when I export to Maya for rendering, what I do, I subdivide a couple of times like that, and I export the 53,000 polys, which is basically kind of nothing, you know. Even if you render without the displacements, you still get a nice result like that. But then with the displacement, if I go here to my HD, because I have HD, you're not going to see much difference. If I press this one for HD, it's just really like the micro detail in there on top. It's kind of overkill, you know. It's almost like you don't see in the renders at all. But it's HD because just in case if I want to go and refine this form and make sure that everything has more fibers and everything, then it's going to be, you know, I have the room in there with the HD geometry. So going back here to the cornea again, if I look in overlap here with the transparency, so you're gonna see it basically like the iris, it almost touches the surface in there, but it doesn't. So when my idea when I was sculpting this way here was to think about like in real life how this thing would create that little fading line. You see like right around the corner, the cornea. Here you're gonna get that little like dark spot in here. And I always thought like maybe this is part of a texture or something. And then I started thinking about it, and I was like, no, maybe this is just a shadow, you know, because you have this area here that's kind of like this globe popping out. And then if you have this transparency starting to happen and you can control that with a map, with a ramp map, then it's pretty cool because you can actually create more like a broad or a very thin line around there. And that line is not going to be a texture, it's going to be simply a shadow, you know. It's going to look much more natural than if you did with the paint, for example. Now, when it comes to the texture itself, I poly painted this manually, as you can tell. Like it's very simple. It's just, you know, it's like just going with the little brush. And this is not even HD. This the globe in here ends at 4.5 million polygons for texture. And then, but one thing that I did for the teeth that I sculpted like a couple of weeks ago was that I found this map in here. Basically, like I was looking for an interesting map for veins, right? Because I want to create some veins in there for the teeth. And then I went to the interwebs. And in the interwebs, I actually found this map here, which is basically like I look for lightning. So I look for pictures of lightning, right? And I thought like it would be very interesting if I had like pictures of roots or stuff like that. But there was like, for some reason, I thought about lightning. And then when I looked for pictures of lightning, I found this one that was kind of like nice resolution. And I just like transformed this one into an alpha. And then this is the alpha I have here in ZBrush now. And then I'm going to show you how it works actually. So if I have, let's just test the depth of my brush here. So if I just do something like this, let's try that. So see, like it has very interesting detail, and it's much more organic than the ones I had hand painted in there, right? Of course, like I still like hand painting stuff, but if you guys want to save time and add more realism to it, I think like those micro veins with an actually lightning or roots or whatever you can find, you know, it's like from nature. When I posted on my Instagram about that, I said like more and more I believe that our bodies are basically just like a miniature of the universe. You know, it's like everything is kind of like it's echoing nature. You know, it's like you know, like you look at brain cells, it looks like galaxies and things like that. You know, it's like if you look at the, you know, the veins in here and they look like roots and lightning and things like that. Everything is so connected, and those patterns repeat themselves like across the world and in different scales, right? But it's kind of like all the same. It's very interesting. So so I have those veins in here. So as we know, ZBrush, you can paint and sculpt at the same time. So let's try and add some color in here. So I picked this color here. Let's just pick this one here and see what we get. I'm gonna get a little darker with it. And let's try that. So now we can paint and sculpt at the same time. And we don't need to worry too much about invading this area here too much. I try to avoid actually, but if you invade a little bit, it's not a problem. Actually, it's going to be a problem here because I'm going to be using the lens. Yeah, let's try to avoid that. But the transparency actually is going to eat a part of it. But definitely the displacement is still going to be there, but the color should be gone. So let's do a little bit more towards here. And if I want to save even more time, ZBrush also has the radial symmetry, right? So you go to transform, activate symmetry, and then you can just click this R in here. And then I have like set 8. So let's see this. Oh, it's in the wrong axis. So let's try Y, no, Z, sorry. Yeah, so around here. So if I have that brush, now to save some time, I can just like do like that, right? And I create like in multiple places at the same time. So let's avoid the corner in there. And then I can do it like with different scales, of course. A lot of this stuff probably not gonna be visible, like I said, right? Like it's gonna be covered. But those ones that can reach a little bit longer like that, that can add a little bit of a breakup. It's more about like the specular breakup, you know, how this is gonna look like. And then we can get like crazy here. We can actually make even more saturated red and make like a big one. Let's see from here. If we're gonna do like, you know, play God or something, we can do this kind of stuff. But again, like visible is gonna be just this area here. So, you know, a lot of this stuff is gonna be disappearing anyway. But basically, like, you know, those are like little tricks you can do. Like other than that, it's just like hand painting everything, you know, and basically like having the patience of a Pore maker and just like, you know, coming like and building those little rivers, which is gonna be, you know, tedious for me to do like in front of you guys. But you know, it's like this brush here, if you find something like that, it can save you a lot of time. You know, you can just like do stuff like that. So now we have the eyeball in there. You see like the color, in terms of color variation, I try to start with the color that's basically plain like that. And kind of like reddish, dark, right? If I pick this color here, is something around, it's very desaturated. It's kind of like that, right? That color right there. So 138, 89, 84, but not a rule. And then I normally like paint everything, like I said before, with the spray, right? Like instead of like a plain brush, like just with the spray, you see like there's some variation in here, like a little wider, little redder. And then from time to time, I add like hints of yellow and orange like this, especially around here, just to add a little bit more of like, there's a little bit of an organic feel, right? Because if it's plain white, it doesn't look natural, right? Like you normally get like a little bit more of like yellows and things like that. So you're gonna see like I picked this area around here in the top. Let me just turn off the symmetry. This area around here on the top, and then there's a tiny bit in here. Sometimes I paint the yellow around the veins in mixing with the veins, like in this case here. So they look like they starting like to kind of like blow up in this area, right? Like it's almost like you have something developing in there. And try to build things in layer. You know, it's like you make one layer that's very, very faint and a little thicker and more smooth, right? Another one's it's tighter and a little bit more sharp on the top. And then everything, like in terms of skin, in terms of this texture here, it's always the same for me. It's a repetition, but repetition with variations, right? You use more intensity, less intensity, bigger, smaller. it's all about like creating a dynamic color palette, right? But just like using those variations in form palette as well. So, and then the last piece is this one here. You're gonna see how bad it looks, because at the end of the day, I recolorized everything in Maya, but here's an opportunity to actually do something and make it look better. So for example, this looks very crappy. You're gonna see the veins in there look very rough, but you can tell that, for example, like this entire area here is gonna disappear. It's gonna blend with the rest of the eye. And then this area here is basically what you're gonna see. But then in Maya, I actually, you know, recolorize this stuff like to make it much more close to this. So maybe I can skip this right now, because I'm gonna have to actually redo this. You know, it's like it's gonna be the same process, probably using this brush to save me some time, and then copying some of this coloring here and trying to mimic it in there. But for now, that's basically like the let's see, like we have 3 pieces in here. We have the iris itself, the cornea, and the caruncula. But then in Maya, I have an additional piece, which is basically the little flat disc that goes inside here for the pupil, right? So let's look at how those things look like in Maya. And probably gonna re-export this one with those variations. I just added some more veins, so maybe I'm gonna re-export it to see how it looks like. But I think we can do this. I can export this stuff as we play with Maya, and then leave this one in the background. So let's see. Let's go back in resolution here, and then let me just double check. I have 1.1 thousand polys for it. Let's see in Maya what I have for my base mesh. So I have this guy here, and this one, it's at 17,000, right? So 17,000 polys. So let's match that, because I want to bring it here with the same resolution. So let's go back to ZBrush, and then we have 1.1 for 17. That's weird. It looks like, it doesn't look like it's 17. It looks like it has less than that. But I guess, oh no, it's because it's subdivided. Okay, yeah, because I have if you press 3 in Maya, you get subdivision. So, but it's 1.1, so it's the lowest resolution. So let's go to the lowest resolution again. And first off, I'm gonna save my Maya, my scene. Let's do HD 3, 4. And I'm gonna do the same process as I did with the face, which is gonna be go. It shouldn't take that long. I don't have a lot of, I have only 18,000. So let's export this one first, and export as cornea 3, fine. And then I'm gonna go to my morph target first. Let's make sure morph target, delete. So store, switch, import. I'm gonna import that one again, because we just want to generate the difference. I'm gonna keep our RGB at 100. This one doesn't matter. So in plugins, I'm gonna just rename this first. It's gonna be cornea. Let's see, like, I don't know how many I have in there, but let's leave it, yeah, cornea 4, something like that. So now I'm gonna go to plugin, and then displacement, texture from Polypaint as well. I have just one map for the entire eye, so it should be fast. And then same deal, like 8K, switch morph target, adaptive for 32 bits, EXR, and mid at 0. And let's fire this thing up. So let's go to eye, and then source images, and let's do it here. Let's see how fast it's gonna be. It might be, actually, let's see if it's gonna take too long. Yeah, should be fine. So let's switch here to Maya. And then here in Maya, I prepared a little scene that we're gonna be updating with this new stuff we just did. But this little scene here is just to show you scale. Because as we spoke about, like in a previous class we had, let me see if yeah, it got a little slow because ZBrush is working in the background. But as you can tell here, in Maya, the scale of my eyeball, if I switch to another view here, for example, this one, right? I have my measure tools in here. And let's get this one and this one. And you can tell, like, the measurement here is 2.4. And if I go here in this little button, the configuration in Maya, right? I click settings, you can see I define everything is in centimeters right now, right? So my scale is in centimeters. So I have 2.4 centimeters in here, right? From one side to another one. Roughly, it's slightly bigger in there, it's leaking a little bit to the side, but roughly 2.4. So that means like 24 millimeters, which is like the average. If you Google, you know, it's like an average eyeball, gonna be around that, like 2.3, something like that, 2.4. And then for the iris itself, it's about 1.2, right? So it's kind of like halfway, so like half of that. So this is my disc, but remember I had that buffer in there that actually is the buffer to make the blending. So I'm gonna go here, and then here in the viewport, you can actually see that the 1.2 is right there around this area, right? So that's the size of the iris. So it's like 2.4 to 1.2, right? And that's basically the structure of the eye I have right now. Let me just see if the render is working here. Let me just update the scene and see if it's working first. Because I thought that, yeah, it's working. Okay, so I can bring this one up. But first, let's just check our ZBrush and see how it's doing, because I want to work with that brand new map. Still working. Go ZBrush. I wait for you. So let's talk about a couple of things here. Once I brought the geometry, I brought the lowest resolution, right? That's the one at 1.1 thousand polys that I'm exporting the map from. And then, like I said before, for the iris, I'm bringing the high res, not like the super high res, but fairly high res at 53,000 polys, because that way I can avoid having the vector displacement, right? Because I get part of the little caves in here in the mesh itself, right? And then the third part here is this little lens in there. So if I isolate it, you can see it. It's just a little, you know, it's supposed to go to be kind of like a lens, you know, it's like you have both sides. But at the same time, because I'm not using it as a lens, I'm using it just like as a cover. So it basically, like, it doesn't have to be like refractive or anything. It's just a black hole in there that I'm using, right? So let's show everything again here. So display all. And then let's talk about the other pieces here. So so I got the Caruncula, I got the cornea, and I got the iris and the pupil, right? The little hole. So Arnold, the way it works, it basically, like, when you first bring an object and you want to add transparency to this object, it's not like it's going to assume that you're just going to plug like a transparency map and it's going to work. You have to define this object as being transparent, right? So you're going to notice here, if I click anything, for example, anything that's not transparent, for example, if I go, oh, sorry. So if I go to the iris here, and I go to the properties of the object, right? Which is Control A, if you remember, right? You open the properties, so it's right down there. So you're gonna see the first thing here under Arnold, under the Arnold tab, you're gonna see there is an opaque switch in here. That's how Arnold treats every single object when you first bring it to here, right? So you import from some other program, it's gonna come as opaque. Now, if I click this one here, you see the opaque is off, because I need transparency here. I'm gonna need to do that blend, right? So between this one and this one, what changes is the opaque, right? Other than that, I brought the iris in here, and let's pretend I already have my displacement map exported and all. If you remember correctly, I always give a name, SSS set name, that's for the subsurface. That has to be a name that goes across the board. So if I wanna make sure, for example, the eye and the iris and the skin around the eye, all gonna kind of like play along together, you know, it's like you're gonna have like a smooth transition and not, instead of like a harsh line in the subsurface, you're always gonna use the same name across the board. So this is a generic name that I use that's called shared SSS. And I always use this name because even if I bring stuff from other scenes, it always respects it, you know, so I don't need to reinvent the wheel. It's always like the same name I use. You can pick any name you want. So since I already brought a fairly high-res mesh, I don't feel like subdividing many times. So by default was none, so I switched to Catmull Clark. By default was 0, I switched to 2 subdivisions. By default, this one was raster, I switched to OBJ. Basically same settings we already spoke about for the skin, for the face. And then for this UV smoothing, linear, because I don't want any smoothing, right? Everything comes square from ZBrush, and that's how I want it to stay. And then for the height, the default is 1, right? And then the only thing I turned on was the auto bump. Basically, that's the thing that, you know, if subdivide enough, but then if it doesn't have enough subdivision to represent the super fine stuff, then Arnold switched this stuff to bump. And then at render time, it creates kind of like a virtual bump map. So it can show you all the detail. So that's basically what I did for this guy here. Then for this one is basically the same stuff. Probably what changed is the amount of subdivision levels. I subdivided a little bit more. I can even add like 4 here because it's so low res. And then, but all the same, Catmull Clark, OBJ linear, and then Autobump, right? And then if we go to, let's see, display, show all. Go to this guy here, same deal. Catmull Clark here in this case is subdivided 4 times because I want to make sure I get the finer stuff. OBJ linear 1, auto bump. And then the difference, of course, right here, opaque is off, right? Just like this guy here, off and off because we want to blend it, right? So let's check ZBrush. Still going. Come on, ZBrush. You can do it. It's a single map, man. That's what I'm saying. You know, it's like every time you export something that's non-HD, it's this, right? Like it's expected. That's your nightmare that you have in your daily basis if you're working with high resolution stuff in ZBrush. And that's why I try to avoid to do anything without HD, you know. So in this case of, for example, the iris, the high resolution has only 800,000, so it's going to be fast to export the displacement. But in the case of the cornea, since I already have 4.4 million polygons here, what I'm going to do possibly is to actually copy this one, duplicate as a second subtool. Then I'm going to delete the highest level, so I'm going to be around 1 point something million, right? I'm going to subdivide HD 1 or 2 times maybe, and then enter HD and then project everything. Someone asked on in the group or in the chat about the projection stuff. You can project HD to HD, HD to non-HD, non-HD to HD, anything goes, you know. The only way you do it is basically like you have to have 2 HD models, of course. If you subdivide one HD and the other subtool, you subdivide HD as well. Before you project HD, you have to enter the HD mode in each one of them. So it's pretty straightforward. You just like go to one subtool, go to HD mode, in just a chunk, try to avoid subdividing the entire thing, right? You just subdivide the stuff that you're gonna need, just the piece you're gonna subdivide, project. And then once you're in HD, you're just clicking the next subtool, and now you're in that mode. And then you can go HD again, and then you can project stuff from one to another one because both are gonna be HD. So no problem in there. So here is still exporting, but we can do some renders here. Let's see what we have. Let's set it up first. So right here, let's change the resolution. Let's see what we have for this guy. I think the scene is pretty plain. Yeah, it doesn't have anything here. So if you remember correctly, if you want to start with the scene we want to test, it's good to set the project, right? So I'm going to just go to File, and then I can just see, for example, like Set Project. And then here I can just pick the I project. I already have all my subfolders created by Maya before, so I can just say Set, right? Set. So that's my new project now. So now it's switched me here, images. So anything I render is going to go inside of it. I'm just going to put like ID or something like that. Yeah, again, if I want to set a scene to actually render multiple angles, like by animating the camera, the best thing to do here is just switch to name the number and an extension. So that's it. Perspective, okay. I'm not using any fancy camera. I'm going to put 900 by 900 here for the resolution. And then for the render, I can start very low. Let's start like with 6 in here. Even more, we only have, let's say 6, so we have 320 maximum samples. So let's try 3, 3, 3, 3. So like 1,000 or something, right? And then let's see our filter here. Again, Gaussian. If I want to do a little bit sharper, I can do like 1.5 here. So it's, the image renders a little sharper. And then for ray depth, I mean, I have diffuse, specular. I can crank those numbers a little bit more. Let's say like 5, 5. Normally you don't need, but you know, if you run into trouble of having like multiple surfaces, for example, you have glasses, right in front of the eye. So basically the rays have to hit like the front face, the back face, and then the front face of the eye, the back face of the eye. So you're probably going to need more depth, you know, otherwise it's not going to go through everything. But I mean, like this is just in case if you have multiple layers of glass, for example, right? You want to make sure things go, the light passes through. And then for the system in here, in Arnold, the thing that I normally use, by default, the bucket size is 64 pixels, which is the size of the little square in the render tiles, right? So I normally put this one at the minimum of 16 because I want to see things being rendered fast. And in that way, for example, my computer here has 32 threads, right? So you're going to see 32 little squares at the same time. So each one of them is, if it's very tiny, you basically like finish the rendering there, jumps to the next one, starts rendering. So that way it goes faster to see results, you know? So I do that as well. So at this point, we can just switch here to view, and then we can go to camera settings and resolution gate. Again, we went through this before, but you know, just again. So, and now I have the eyeball in there. And I'm gonna do a render first before I show you my shader networks. So I'm gonna just make sure I have everything selected. I'm just gonna group this ones. Okay, so I have all my shader network ready to view in there. And then let's do a rendering here. And the first thing you're gonna see is that this is the exact same eye I'm using for Stan Winston. And I don't like the blend in here. So that blend, we're gonna try to improve it now. So let's do a little render. Arnold, open Arnold view. Let's move it over here. And then let's press play and see what happens. It's probably gonna load those maps in memory first. So I got that. And you see like the blend in there is pretty, you know, it's pretty broad and it's not very natural at this point. So if I look a little bit closer here, for example, where we have you see like how crappy my connection is here. I can do a much better job actually, you know, putting this in the correct place. But just remember, I'm reusing a lot of stuff from other models, right? So a lot of the stuff got super mushy over time. So I'm gonna be actually, you know, tweaking this to make it more perfect around there. But at the same time, it's very forgiving because what's happening here is that I have a transparency happening. And this transparency is not just the transparency of the transmission. It's a transparency of the geometry as well. And the difference is that if you don't have a transparency of geometry, you still get like the specular and everything. But if you make the geometry transparent, then you don't have any specular affecting. So basically what I'm doing here, I'm creating like a perfect blend. I can show you here in the render that works quite nicely right here because I'm using the transparency for geometry as well. So I can just reduce in here. Yeah, so that just that little part's gonna render now. And you saw, for example, like the stuff I said before in ZBrush, the texture of this stuff was pretty crappy, but I kind of like I colorized it back here in Maya to get a little bit closer to that color. But I can actually go back to ZBrush and then to avoid like prevent like the you know the cheating in there, just like do a decent job with the coloring to something closer to this, and then bring it back and then just remove the colorization from here. So let's see. At this point, it took 10 minutes to export that eyeball, which was only like 18 million polygons, right? While it took 6 minutes for us to export the entire face of Stan that was like 70 million polygons. That's the difference between HD and non-HD, which is pretty incredible. So let's go back in here, and then first thing, let's just update that file, and then so we can actually see the eyeball with those extra veins I put in there. So let's do this. I'm just gonna select this guy, and we're gonna do that trick. I'm gonna import it. Another way you can do it, I can show you guys too. Let's see, OBJ. Actually, did I export it here? Let's just make sure I'm exporting the right thing. So export, and then OBJ. I think I exported as, let's see. Huh, I didn't export here, I guess. Cornea 4. Okay, let's put it in there. corner 4. So let's bring this one back. And then that's going to be OBJ and OBJ cornea 4. Bring this one. And in theory, it should be the same topology, right? Same number of the polygons. So let's just click this one. Yeah, 1.2. And then, so basically I'm clicking the new one first, and then going up, and then clicking the old one. And instead of like doing that transfer attributes that I did many times already in front of you guys, we can try to do this. Look, you can go to animation, for example. And then in this case, you're gonna do the opposite. You're gonna click the cornea, based like the one you have already in your scene, and the new model. And you can just go to animation here, and you can say deform blend shape, right? You can use a blend shape too. So if I switch to blend shape, if I do that, basically like it pops right to the right spot, right? But it's the same deal. I mean, like you have to delete the history. So I'm gonna delete my history here, and now I can delete this model, and they should blend, right? It should be perfect in there. So I do this because that way I don't need to reset all those settings here for, you know, for the object itself, right? Everything's already set the way I did. And I don't need to reset like any like shaders. The shader that was working is still working in there, but we're gonna replace the maps. So we're gonna go to iCornea here. I'm gonna click this little arrow and then look for my displacement material. Click that one. And then it's pulling this like all the way from Dick Smith, look. Pulling from old models. So and then so let's see, first thing got Arnold here. Let's turn off the auto generate textures, and I'm gonna just click this one, and let's see if we can find in the I folder, which is the one we just exported to. So I, and we had source images, so it's just one map. So great. So I'm gonna get the displacement map, which is DM, right? So displacement map, loop. Okay, cornea. And then now for the color, let's click it again. For the color, let's look for it. So I have a base color here. Let's see if I'm using the base color or not. I'm not. So basically, like if I have anything plugged in here as base color, but I'm actually using a subsurface at 100% means 1 here, right? That means it's basically completely ignoring the base color. But I have that as a backup because if I want to reduce the amount of subsurface and mix with the diffuse, then I can actually bring it back, right? But that's not the case here. So I have random walk. This is fairly scattery. So remember the skin we are using like 1.1, but here for the eye I'm actually doubling that. I don't know if I need to do that, go that big. I can bring it back a little bit here. Let's try 180. And there's no front scatter, right? Maybe I can add a little bit of front scatter here. And then, so for the subsurface color, I'm gonna click, and I'm gonna pick the new one. So let's go back here, navigate out of Dick Smith, go back to I. Oh shit. So many folders, so little time. And then coordinate texture map, right? So that's a single object. You see like, is a square at the corners because I'm not smoothing it. And that's why we're not smoothing, we're using linear here inside of Maya. So open it. So the color should be replaced. And then here, if you go down, you're gonna see it has to be RGB because it's not, you know, an HDRI or something else, right? It's just color. And then under color balancing here, you're gonna see there, I have something here, a little trick. So for the offset, I don't have anything, but in the color gain, I plugged something in here. And it's been so long that I don't even remember what it is. So let's look at the color gain. It's actually a circular ramp. So if I click this one, you're gonna see it's very simple. Have this one set at 0, and this one here is set at 0.57. Let's put 57, it's easier. So basically what I'm doing here, possibly, I'm actually introducing less and more color, basically like making darker in the center and then making a little bit lighter when it goes towards the borders. So basically like I'm actually making this interior area here a little bit darker, right? So instead of like having the cornea white, like I had in my map, it's turning into like black probably. So, and then for the color offset, I don't have anything. So let's go back here And now for the radius, let's see what we have for the radius. For the radius, I have the same map plugged, so let's replace it. It's the same. I could actually have a copy of it, basically like the same map plugged twice. But I try to avoid, because if I want to do like independent adjustments, I want to make sure that I have two maps instead of just one plug in two different places. Let's go this one, and then corner like that, right? So that's replaced now. So remember, the first one was actually the color, and this one is the radius, right? So in the radius in here, that's basically what I'm using. Like I don't have anything plugged other than that. But if you wanted to colorize, for example, like more towards the color of the scatter you're gonna use, remember that color that we picked for the skin, right? Probably for the eye, the color would be like a yellowish, whitish, instead of like something more peach, like the color of the skin we are dealing with. But in this case here, I'm just keeping the exact same color. So the eye, the scatter, and the color are basically the same. But the subsurface color, I'm actually just tweaking it just to get the darker rim in the center where the cornea should be. So that's basically what I did for the eye. Let me open the shader network, and I can just sample this one. So right there. Super simple again. So we can go through it. So basically like we have our displacement map plugged, right? So here's the displacement map. So that's this map right here. So let's move it away. We don't need it. So that's displacement map. For the cornea, for the color, we are plugging the color into the subsurface radius like we already did just now. And also a copy of the same map, we are plugging both into the base color and the subsurface color. But the base color, remember, you're not using at all, because like I said, in the subsurface, if you have the subsurface all the way to 1 here, it basically ignores everything from the other map. Now, if I bring it down here, now basically like all it's going to use is the base here. So there's no subsurface happening. It's going to use just a diffuse color instead, right? But if I go back, then it's all I'm using. So in theory here, since I'm not using it, I could completely like delete this one, but I keep just as a backup. And then for the ramps, oh, let's look at the transparency of the cornea, that we didn't go through that. So we already spoke about the subsurface. So the colors, the settings I'm using here. Let's see the coat. Coat, I'm not using anything apparently. So weight as 0. So I eliminate it. Sheen, nothing, right? Now, other geometry. Oh, interesting. Oh, probably I'm not using the same. Let's see. Is that the map I'm using? Oh, yeah. This one doesn't have a geometry opacity transparency. It's this one here. This one has something plugged, as you can tell. So the Caruncula has it, but this one doesn't need it, because I don't need to make the transparency, the geometry transparent, because I still need the reflections in the middle. I just need to be transmission to be on. So if I go back here to transmission, now that's the place where we're going to plug my transparency map. It has to be round, right? So I'm gonna show you how I have it plugged in here, and what it is just super simple. So remember that when I made my UV maps for this one here, if I look at the UV maps, it's super simple. It looks like this, and I did that on purpose because I want to make sure that it's completely right in the middle, it's centered, right? So it's centered with the entire tile, because that way I can actually play with circular stuff like transparency maps, and all is going to affect whatever I do in here, right? So that's why it's centered in, perfectly centered in there. And that's the back of the eye in there, because I'm not going to see it from the middle and back. I just using a tiny little piece of the UV because I don't need all the resolution in there. But all the way to the middle part is going to be the most visible stuff. So I keep it a bigger map. So going back here, let's see what we have. So the transmission, if I click this button here, what I plugged in there, it's this AI ramp float, which you can find. Let's see if I can find it here. So Arnold shader, actually it should be utility, I think. What's let's see, I even forgot what it is. It's like a ramp float. Let's see if it's in order here. So ramp float, this one here. So under Arnold utility, if you click this AI ramp float, this one here, it's basically a ramp. The same way that Maya has a ramp, I'm using like this one from Arnold, because what happened is that since they updated Maya to this Arnold, actually the Arnold to the new version with the random walk and everything, some of my old files I tried to open and it wasn't recognizing like the Maya transparency stuff. I was very surprised because they're normally very compatible. And I was like, what the hell? I was not showing the transparency in the corner anymore. And I was like, oh man, what am I gonna do now? You know, it's like it's all plugged in there. So I was like, let me see what they have to offer from their own shaders. So I went to Arnold and then I found this ramp float in here, which is pretty cool. You know, it's like sometimes you get in trouble if you use RGB stuff, but then this float here is basically like it's a floating point, I believe. So you get like much more like precision for the transparency. You get like a much bigger range, probably like 32. And then what I did, I plugged this map in here into the transmission, right? And then if I expand this little tab in here, that's basically what I did. So the transparency is happening from 0, 23, 23 position, going from, you know, 1 to going to 0 at 0.3, 161. So this, the interpolation is linear right now. I could have some kind of curvature, but I think the linear was working fine. So, and let's just explore the rest of the shader, and then I can show you this. I'm gonna tweak this curvature during the real time render, and then you can see how it changes. But let's go back to here and see what else we have in this shader network. For the specular, that's important. It all depends. For example, like sometimes I I want to get something super shiny because I think like, oh yeah, it would be nice, like it would be more alive if I have more shininess. But sometimes I tell you that it doesn't help, you know. Sometimes it's better to keep like a lower specular. For example, like if I have at 0.75, it's not going to be the super mirror kind of specular. It's going to look much more natural, you know. But it all depends. Sometimes you plug a HDRI map that, you know, it's kind of diffuse or something, and then you end up like cranking this number. So at this point I have at 0.95, but I might go as low as 7.5 here. But you test and see how you like it. The roughness is very, very low because I want almost like a mirror effect. So it's 0.020. The index of refraction is at 1360, and there's an anisotropy in there for a specular that I added. I don't remember why, but that's the setting I have right now. But let me just show you this. Why I'm using that kind of index of refraction there, right? If you look to any like internet stuff, you're gonna see like there's lots of different papers and showing the index of refraction that you have in different parts of the eye, right? So the cornea itself, like the inside, which is filled with liquid, right? So you're gonna have like a 1.34, but then this little area here of the cornea itself, so basically like it's 1.38. So there are different, types of refraction happening in different areas. So I normally try to use like an average. So I picked like 136 because I'm not building like a anatomically correct eye, right? It's like a very approximate. The size is correct, but it doesn't have the inner structures exactly like a human eye. So I have like 1.36. Which is the index of refraction right here, right? So we have like a decent amount of refraction. And then other than that, that's it. So that's all I have plugged. The specular transmission is a circular transparency map from Arnold. And then the subsurface we went through, no coat, no emission, no nothing else, right? So let's look at the render itself. Let's bring it back here and do a little render. Let's kill this one, actually. Oh, actually, it's taking some time because it's updating the maps, right? Like with the new stuff we just added. So this one has the brand new maps. Let's actually look around. Let's see if we can find those little, lightning veins, which is pretty cool if they are there, right? So let's just use this area right here. Yeah, sure enough, they are there. The little guys right there. So that adds a lot of realism, you know. It's like just having something to break up the structure in there. So let's get out of here. Let's rotate it let's go around. So the index of refraction I was talking about, to see like how the iris is deforming in there, right? It goes towards the side. Get that nice little deformation in there. And that's basically the same, it's the HDRI map I'm using for that scene that I render with the guy. So I can actually point you to that as well. Let's leave it rendering for a second. You can just point you to the map I'm using, which is, it's called Veranda. Veranda. If you look at the HDRI Haven for Veranda, you should get this map here, which is pretty cool. I'm using basically like the default stuff, like intensity at 1. I didn't tweak it at all. Just do that stuff, turn off normalize, you know, add one more sample, make it 2, and then the resolution I matched the resolution of 4K. That's about it. So you see like the blending here is not, I'm not happy with it. So let's play with that blending node that we had just now. So I'm gonna click at the eyeball. Let's keep this stuff like rendering. Let's make smaller so I can actually have a fast interaction, right? So let's make it smaller like that. And I can actually zoom in this with the lower resolution, of course. And then you can even like to make even faster, we can just like select an area like this. And you can just render this little corner so we can check the transparency in there. So I'm gonna click the object itself. It should be opening soon for questions for you guys. So it's rendering right there. Let's go to eye corner and then look at the transmission in here. So that transparency map I had, it, remember, was set like this, right? So let's see what happens if I pull those things here. So this one here by default, so we can track this, was 0, 23, 23. So if I bring it towards here, see, it starts eating more of the cornea, right? The transparency is kind of growing in there. So if I go back, and then what if I go really, really back, right? It starts showing more and more of the cornea. So 23, 23, this one is 31, 61. So if I go all the way, you're gonna start seeing completely transparent. So if I go around here, now you see like I can see already the corner of the iris, which is just a disc, and everything else is transparent, right? So let's go back to this one, 0.331, I had 60. And then this one here, oops. Oh, actually this one was 23, 23. Okay, 23, 23, that. And this one is 31, 60. But now we can play with that transparency. Let me just open that. My phone just went off here, my alarm. So that means I can open the mic for you guys very soon. So you see, like I can control that transparency by just doing this, you know, and then you can get that little kind of like a rim, like kind of like a darker rim, just by doing this, because at the end of the day, that's kind of like a shadow, you know. So if you go from different angles, the only thing you have to be careful, of course, is to keep the iris really close to the surface of the eyeball, right? Like the cornea. Otherwise, you're not going to get that blend in the nice shadow in there. So if I look at this from the wireframe, right, you can tell right there that the iris right here, right, it's really, really close to the surface. So you have to make sure that you have that, because if you have too much separation between those two objects, you're gonna get a lot of light leaking into a you know, a hole in there, right? And you don't want to do that. So let's go back to this one. So like I said, I mean, like there's you know, it's like all those tweaks you can do, like and see almost like real time, right? Not quite real time, but see like the blend right here now became a little bit too big. So I can just like keep tweaking it until I'm happy with it. But you know, as long as I get a nicer blend, because only at the way it was a little bit too much. Maybe I can actually eat a little bit more of the iris. Actually the other way around, so that way. So I can actually play and eat a little bit of the borders. So at 20, let's see, 21, 29, something like that. And another thing here in the shader network that I forgot to mention is that you have to make sure you have caustics turned on, right? So I'm gonna go back here to the model. And then if I go down, all the way down, you're gonna see there's advanced in here. And then make sure you have caustics turned on, right? So you can get a nicer result. And let me open the mic here for you guys. All right, you're all unmuted. And then please mute yourselves if you're not talking. And then you see, you got a little bit like too glowy, like there's a dark rim right now. I can actually go back a little bit because it got a little bit too much now. You guys have any questions? Today was a lot more information for you there. So let's get this one back to, what was that, 30 something, right? Yeah. Yeah, it's just a matter of like finding the sweet spot, you know. And of course, like having references on your side, always good. And I have this thing about going by feels, by feel, like most of the time, you know, it's like instead of like actually paying attention and doing more of the reference. So it's kind of like there is a lot of artistic approach instead of like just, you know, I go into, I like what it, you know, how he feels, and then I compare with some pictures sometimes, like, oh, that's kind of far, and then I start tweaking it. But yeah, I think it was pretty close actually. What I can do actually here, because for the color, oh, we forgot to explore the color of the iris. So let's look at the color of the iris, because there are tricks we can do with the color of the iris to add more variation, and maybe even make it slightly darker in the borders, you know. And let's explore that. Let's, if I go to the iris itself, we didn't talk about the shader for it. So let's go back in here. Let's get this, and let's just sample it, graph, select it. So for the iris here, I have more nodes, right? Let's see what it is. Sometimes, you know, it's like it looks like it's a lot of stuff, but it's actually not. So let's start by elimination here. You have my displacement map that's plugged in there, right? So displacement map, we don't need it. Let's just move it out of the way. So that's basically makes things simpler here. So all we have is just those few nodes. So let's see what they are. So again, I have the base color and I have the subsurface color. So this one, I believe I'm using a little bit of a mix of the two. So if I go to the iris here, I have the subsurface at 1. Oh no, actually I'm not using. I'm using just subsurface. Again, this one plug that the base plug to the base color, it's completely, I can ignore that. So if at this point I can just eliminate this one if I want to. Let's keep it in there because I normally want to play and blend things back. So what I have here, let's go from the top. Base is at 1 with a color plugged in there, but I'm not using, like I said, so just ignore that. Specular. So for the specular is a brown eye. I'm using 600 for the specular, and I'm using a roughness of 200. And I'm doing this because I have that, if you remember in ZBrush, if I look at the eye itself, it has a ton of breakup already. It has all that little noise and stuff. So even if I use like some spec that's not like super broad and rough, it's still gonna break up a lot because I have all this plus the HD stuff that's behind it, right? I have all the HD stuff in there. So I'm using 600 and 200. For the index of refraction, doesn't matter, it's not refracting, right? It's just this ends up like if you don't have any transparency, it just helps with the amount of spec. So you can actually basically like over crank this spec by actually tweaking this number. For example, if you hit like 1 for the weight and it's not specky enough, you can actually crank this index of refraction much higher, and then affects that. So transmission, there's nothing, so it's not transparent. So we are talking about the iris. Subsurface, it's at 1. And the radius in here, I'm actually using a funny color. It's kind of like a baby puke. It's kind of like a almost like a desaturated ochre, right? So like kind of like that way. I don't know if I switch here to RGB, you can see what it is. 0 to 255 maybe. So 71, 59, 37. But I mean, totally up to you guys, but those are the numbers I have. And then for the scale, it's basically like it has barely any subsurface. So it's like, it's very almost like completely not subsurfacey. And then it has random walk as well. Again, I like adding a little bit of front scatter, so like a little bit of that. Let's see what kind of color I have. Let's see, coat first. I don't have. Oh, I have a little bit of coat.
Hey, Kris.
Yes.
I have a doubt about the iris. Does it has thickness on the geometry? I mean.
Oh, thickness?
Yeah.
No. It's just a disc. It's completely flat like that. If you go to the back, hey, let me turn on the display properties here. Double. See, it's like it's just a shell.
And does it not give you problems with the scattering?
That's a good point. Like I had a little bit of problems with scatter with this one. Maybe that's the reason.
Okay. I'm using an eye quite similar to yours, basically because I was trying to copy your eye for a long time.
Yeah,
so,
I had some problems. I was fighting a little bit those forms, you know. I was getting the scatter, but it was not like something that was looking much precise, you know. That's why I kind of eliminated a lot of it.
okay.
I'm pretty sure if I had some some volume in there, it's gonna help. So thanks for the tip. the tip. Yeah.
Thank you, Kris.
Yeah. So here for the coat, what I'm doing, I'm actually doubling up with sometimes instead of like using the coat as something to make things look wet, I do the opposite. I make to add a secondary specular that's much broader, right? So this one here has a roughness very high of 700. So that means it's going to be very, very diffuse specular. And then for the color itself, I have these values in here in RGB, 255, 125, 67. So it's kind of like orangey peach, right? It's kind of desaturated. And then for Shin, I don't think I have anything. Nope, 0. Emission, no. Geometry, nothing. Oh, actually, I have bump. So I'm plugging a noise in there, but that's overkill because now I have displacement. So I'm going to just eliminate this one. I'm going to remove this. So break this. I don't need that. And then let's just see now if the shader is a little bit simpler now without that. Because I want to make sure that, yeah, I see like this, I have a lot going on in there. So now it gets a little bit more complicated here when I'm colorizing some stuff, you know. For example, if I go to the shader itself, and then I look at the colors I have plugged in my subsurface. So this one here, right? I'm gonna go to the color. And then I'm gonna see that I have a map plugged in there that looks like this guy here. It's like, it's super simple looking. I can show you the, let's see if it's gonna open it. Sometimes it doesn't. Let's go back here. Let's see around here if it's gonna show me. So let's see. This guy. So if let's see if I click view, it's going to show if any software pops here. Okay, so this is the map I have, which is like, it's almost like no variation. There's a little bit variation at the border, so it's a little bit darker, and then kind of orangey. There's some, you know, slightly greenish, a little shitty. But I'm actually colorizing it a little bit here in Photoshop. So let's see, in Photoshop, in Maya. So if I go to the color gain here, which by default should be white, and the color offset should be black, right? So let's see what I have plugged in here. So if I click in the color gain, what I have is just like it's a circular RGB, it's a ramp RGB. So instead of like the ramp float that's just black and white, the ramp RGB, you can have some colors, right? So this one here, it goes from a color that looks like this, RGB 0 to 255, so 196, 195, 172. I believe it's slightly kind of like towards the grayish yellow or something. Yeah, looks like. Or actually, it's hard to tell here because some magenta and blue in there. It might be more towards, yeah, it's hard to tell because the yellow is actually, no, it's actually going more towards the yellow. Yeah, it might be a little yellowish. And this one's more grayish. So this one should be 130, 137, 140. So it's almost completely gray. Very little variation. So position as 0.5, and then this one position as 0.3516. And so this one is here just to tweak that color slightly. Depending on the type of eye I'm working on, I can push those values and actually colorize and help me to colorize the iris altogether. So for example, like if you look at some other characters I made, I normally play with those ramps just to add more color, you know, instead of like photoshopping things. And then for this one here, this is actually the color offset. So remember, like it starts at black because there's no offset. The more it goes towards white, the more washed out it gets, unless you add some color in between. And then in this case, it actually gets, you know, some colors introduced to it. So if I go to the color offset here, let's see what I have plugged. I have another AI ramp RGB, which is basically the Arnold that I was showing before, right? Like I have the float and I have the, I'm sorry, the RGB. So I plugged another one of those. And this one, the colors I'm using. So this one is at position 0.3100. And then it's kind of like a grayish kind of thing. It's a dark gray, very dark. 3, 3, and 2, almost completely black. And this one should be completely black. So this one at position 0.4400. And this one's completely black. So it's just like probably adding a little bit more color towards the center and kind of like keeping the color around the center a little bit lighter than what it was originally. And then the board is keeping exactly the same. So basically like making it a little brighter in the middle. That's what this one is doing. But it's just like by little bit. It's just a matter of like visually tweaking and seeing the renders, how they look like. Now for the UVs for this guy, if you look at the UV editor, it's the same deal. It's like centered. So every time I need to do any tweaking, I can use like circular maps and then tweak it circularly, right? So that's an easy way to do it. So let's just close this one. So yeah, at the end of the day, let's see if we switch back here to our. Oh, the last part I forgot. Let's just switch to this one here and crank a render here. Let's just see. So let's play with that color in there, for example. Like let's see what these nodes are doing. So in this case here, if I click this one, and that's basically the one I'm actually making a little brighter, like I said. If I just like move it up, you'll see what happens in there. It's like the middle is becoming much brighter. And then the border is staying kind of like dark, right? So with that in mind here, let's say if I introduce any color in here, let's go back to this one here. And let's see if I introduce anything like this, right? I can play with a little color in here. That's the offset, by the way. So I have to do a mix between offset of color and also the color itself, right? So I have to play with both. So this offset here, basically, I can create stuff like that. But in this case here, let me just keep it where we had before, which is something like very minor, maybe like 3, 3, 3 or something. And then this one here, I can bring it back, and then it's going to get darker and darker, if I bring it back and forth. So at this point here, I don't think it's affecting that much because I think it's going to cover the entire iris. But if you go back to this map here, the first one, the color gain itself, and then if you play with this one, now this one is one that's actually going to make things a little bit differently. So if I make it a little bit smaller like that, you're going to see the color changing completely now. I can get like a much darker tone, right? Or I can actually introduce any color here. So if I go back to HSD and then switch back here, now I'm changing the color itself without the offset, right? And then, so if I combine like this with the offset, basically like both going towards the same similar kind of color, I can get like some interesting colors happening to the eye without having to tweak my my texture, right? But again, like this is almost like it's almost like something that I'm using just like almost as a concept, I do those things just to have results very fast. But then at the end, if I wanted something really precise, I would rather go back and redo it. For example, like in the case of the Caruncula, like I said before, it's an example. It's colorized in here in Maya, but I want to make sure I'm painting the right thing in ZBrush. So that's when I'm going to redo it. Probably the eye is going to be the same deal. I can actually get the color in here and you know, redo it. So let's see this external color here. If I go darker, if I can get a little bit more of that rim. Let's see, bring it back. Yeah, I start getting a little bit darker around the borders. That. So, and then of course, like the spec that I have in there is like, it's cranked all the way to 0.90, like I said before. Let's bring it down to 750, like I said. So now it to me, it normally looks a little bit more natural, you know, when you're gonna have the reflection cranked all the way up. It looks a little bit more interesting, but you know, it depends of, you know, sometimes the scene or whatever. So yeah. And then the last piece we have to talk about is the Caruncula itself. So let's talk about that, and then let's talk about the stuff I did on the model over the weekend. Oh, you see, like I removed the noise from the iris, and now it's looking a little funny. It looks very shiny. You see, I think what I did in the past, maybe the displacement wasn't working or something like that. I'm gonna re-export the displacement and replug it, because you see, it totally destroyed that effect of the noise that I had there. It was looking pretty natural. It looks kind of like a chocolate now, caramel. So I'm gonna have to redo that. So let's look at the Caruncula, the shader I have. This one is a good one to look at. So click on that. Yeah.
I have two questions.
Yes.
About the vector displacement, have you used this in production or for yourself?
In production, they use in production, but I don't do look dev in production. You know, I only do modeling, but they have plugged in there. It's a tricky one, right? Because ZBrush, they give you this this file that you test, right, to discover what render engine, you know, is going to be compatible with that one. It's kind of like a grid, and you have all those cubes, and I think, like, I don't know if it's a cube becomes a sphere or something like that, and then whatever is, it's kind of like this grid is like numbers and letters, and then there's all those squares, and then you see which one is the render engine you're rendering that's going to render it correctly, right? So it's kind of like, I never went through that process. I'm not using it, but I'm curious, actually. I might start using, you know, because in this way I can actually use like a very low res mesh and then do that way.
Yeah, me too, because I never hear someone that used this before, you know.
Yeah.
And about the eye, for me, is I think works pretty well for the animation. That's the same approach in the production, or you use another type of process, you know, for the eye?
So at work, what they use is a much different geometry, right? They, of course, I cannot talk about details here because it's production of a company. But yeah, it's like the geometry, I actually think like has stuff that doesn't have like in a real eye, right? Mine is kind of like a very simple approach. That's just like, it's just a few objects and everything. There is a lot of stuff that's overcomplicated, and it doesn't translate at the end. You know, it's like sometimes you get like a result that it doesn't look that good. So I think they are kind of like, you know, maybe thinking about like simplify certain things and trying to get a little bit more of, you know, this type of effect. But I know for what we have, it works nicely. You know, it's just like, I think some stuff like it's just some folds and things that they have that just to me don't. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And of course, like in terms of rigging, right? Like if you have a decent rig that has the eyelids following the structure and everything, you don't need to worry about this bulge, like, you know, kind of like intersecting with anything. It's just, yeah, in my case here, I mean, like, since they are just for stills, right? I'm going to try to move it and rotate it around, and then when it's in a nice pose, then I can actually just like match the eyelid to that. But other than that, I don't worry about it, intersections, and yeah. It's so funny. I removed the noise, and now it looks like so weird and shiny. I'm gonna have to, yeah, probably like gonna have to get the displacement correct as well. So let's talk about the Caruncula here. It's a very long piece, and it's actually tucked in the little hole that. So let's save this one here, so we can switch back. Save, so we can actually open the scene with Stan, and then and we can explore that, and at the same time see how I have this cavity in there. So let's just save this one. I think I saved before, but I'm gonna do it again. So 4, 5. And then let's open the Stan file. Let's see. Yeah, that's basically like what I'm gonna do is like, this is the current state of the model, right? I didn't do much after that. And I'm gonna just open the model in ZBrush to show you guys how those things look like. I saw that you guys are, you know, struggling with the Pore stuff, but I can tell you that I cheated. And by that I mean like I'm doing something that some of you guys are doing as well, which is basically creating an array like that, right? So I basically like sculpted this little array using the single pore to help me out, because it would take forever to sculpt like areas. Right? Yeah, like I said before, like for example, if I sculpted the to help me out. Hello. Yeah, like I said before, like, who is talking? I don't understand anything. Okay. Oh, wow.
He said, my life is a lie.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. I'm sorry, guys. But here's the thing. So I said before, like when I sculpted those pores, that sometimes I would create some type of like, you know, like a little array to help me with areas like forehead, sides of the face, and neck and stuff, because I don't want to do one by one. But in the hero areas like cheeks and close to like chin and stuff, everything I do manually. But those guys help me to actually speed up the process quite a lot. So if you want to do that, you can do that, right? So I have a little pore in there as a reference. That's basically the depth I have right now. See, they're quite deep, right? Of course, like you can, when you transform that into a brush, you can actually make it deeper or more shallow, right? But anyway, so that's how they look like. Let's open this, and then I can show you the model. Personal Stan and ZBrush Stan 27. File is growing, is at 1.6 gigabytes right now, but I think it's because I have some teeth saved with it like twice. So I'm gonna remove some of that and try to get it a bit cleaner. So that's my chocolate eye in there. Oh, chocolate eye sounds weird. Sorry. Anyway, so let's go back to this one here and look at the attributes of the Carunculas. So again, I have a base with some color plugged in there, but probably I'm not using this. So if I go to the subsurface, yeah, sure enough, it's not being used. So I'm using just subsurface. So ignore this section, unless you want to have a buffer like I do with having something there. Specular, I'm using like a very specky, which is like 1. The roughness at 0.10, which is like, I don't know why, because like the eye itself was 0.20. I made it even sharper than that for some reason. Units of refraction, I'm using the same as the cornea, so 1.36 average. For the transmission, this one is a funny one because I'm using a ramp. And it's interesting because this map here didn't give me any trouble. The circular ramp didn't translate from the old Maya to the new Arnold, but the ramp, the linear one actually worked fine. So I have a ramp here, and instead of like having a circular ramp, right, it's just like a V ramp. And then if I show you the way it looks in the UVs, so my UVs for this guy are super simple. It looks like this. So you see it's pointing up. So that means if I make a ramp going down here, I don't need to paint a map. Basically, like the ramp is going to start like dissolving this entire area here, right? So that's what I'm doing. So I'm making a map to dissolve the bottom part, which is like this part here, right? That's actually blending to the eye. And the way the ramp looks is just like that. Depends, of course, on the position of your model, but you're going to have to do like in real time and see how this works for you. But in my case here, I'm using like complete black here at 0.1257, and then completely white at 0.2515. And that's basically what it is for the ramp. Basically, like, that's the philosophy behind it. But then the trick in here is to use that as a transmission and as a geometry transparency, right? So we're going to go down here where you're going to see geometry, and you're going to see a opacity here. So if I click opacity, I have the same map plugged in there. Actually, this one is is it a reverse of that, or is it the same? Let's open it. I don't know if I plug the reversed version of it, because you can actually reverse in the shader. So it's interesting if I did that. Yeah, it's weird. See how stupid? I have two ramps instead of just one. So I have one going from white to black and another one going from black to white. But apparently I did it for some reason. Because you don't need to do that, because there's an effect in here. If you go to effects and you have the invert here, right? So that one inverts for you. So in theory, I could use the same one, but for some reason I inverted it. I don't know. Or you have to have it inverted for the geometry. Maybe that's what it is. But anyway, you're seeing it visually here. That's basically what I have plugged in there. And in this case here, I'm avoiding caustics because that's just like so close to the surface in there. I'm not like producing any caustics. The only caustic is coming from the coordinate itself. So let's see the rest of the settings in here. So specular, we already spoke about. Transmission, we already showed the ramp in there. And then the subsurface, we have a color in here, which is just like a, you know, kind of peach color, similar to that one that we use, like the generic color, right? And then the scale, it's 115, which is very close to the subsurface scale for the skin in general. And random walk 2, again, I'm going to put a little bit of front scatter here, put 1. And then for the coat, I'm using some coat in here. And this one is actually, I'm using to over crank it because for some reason I was not getting enough spec, but I kind of over cranked in here, and then the roughness is very low, and that's gave me a little bit more of that tiny little speck in there to look super shiny. And then other than that, that's it. I mean, there's nothing here. And then of course in the subsurface color, let's see what I have. So I have that color that came from ZBrush, the Caruncula. It looks pretty bad in ZBrush. I probably have it here still. So if I go here, so like that, so remember that color looked super terrible, like that, right? So that's the color I have. And then all those little veins, you see, like when I model the veins coming all the way close to the eye in here, it's because this stuff is becoming gradually transparent. Some of those veins gonna make a secondary effect, you know, it's like, you're going to have a blend between the veins already in the eyeball, and some of them are going to come from this guy here. So you're going to have a little bit of an overlap, which kind of like adds a little bit to the effect. So if I go back here, let's see. So if I go around right here, let it render in the corner here. So so I have that one plugged, that map from ZBrush. But then for the color here, I'm actually reducing the exposure. In Maya, you can actually, you know, if you want to darken things a little bit more, instead of like tweaking in Photoshop, you can just do it here. Just reduce the exposure a little bit. So very little, just making it a little darker. And then for the color gain, I reduced from white to a little bit less than white. Right, so I brought it back like from 1 to 0.766. And then, for the color offset, if I had it all the way to black, you remember that you would create that very crappy texture I have in ZBrush right now. But because I want something lighter that looks a little bit more pink, actually I'm offsetting that. So the offset has a tiny little bit of this kind of like orange right there, but much more towards gray. So it's kind of like a gray version. So instead of like the default color that would be black, I'm just offsetting a little bit towards gray. And just to get a little bit more pink like that, right? So as you can see here, some of those veins are part of the eyeball texture, but some of them are actually coming from the Caruncula itself. So it creates a new interesting effect, you know, it's like it's this overlap, it adds a little bit of depth in there. But because I'm actually making the object transparent as well as the transmission, right? So basically what's doing is eliminating any specular and shadow from the transparency as well. So basically like the object completely vanishes, including everything, you know. So that's how I found to be like the best way to create the blend and have this this very natural look to it. You know, it's like you look at those guys here, it's hard because it's kind of like low resolution here, but it creates this blend, which is very, very nice, you know. And normally when I extend that object, it extends all the way close to the iris. Instead of like having something very localized like normally we do at work, it's something very localized, so it ends right there. I actually grow it and keep going with it pretty close to the iris. And everything else is modulated by the transparency map, right? So for example, like this object is going all the way here instead of like ending right there as expected. But then it's because I want this overlap to happen and this blend between the veins to happen, you know? So that's why I do it that way. And then, yeah. So basically like the eye, that's how I approach it. As we go with like integrating the eye with the skin, right? I'm gonna be talking about like the way that I introduce like the little tier line underneath, which I have in here. We can actually talk about the shadow, the shader I'm using, which is basically like it's a very simple object. This one here. I didn't know who is talking, but I'm gonna mute everyone, and you guys unmute yourselves. Okay.
Kris.
Yay.
Can you isolate the geometry so I can see the transparency of the ramp, how that reacts, you know?
Oh, isolate, what do you mean?
Hide the entire eye and just put this on the render.
Okay. Yeah, you can see
just
here.
See the ramp, you know?
Yeah, here you can see a little bit of it, right? But I'm gonna just like do that. And then this is basically what it is.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So I mean, like in real time here, you can actually see, like if I go to the opacity here, and then if I tweak this guy, let's see. Right there, right? You can bring it like back and forth. So it's just a matter of like finding the sweet spot where you want a transparency to happen. And then, yeah, that's basically what it is. It's super simple, yeah.
Nice, thanks.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Actually, I think I tweaked it a little bit too much in there. Let's see. Let's just go back to my default so I can save the file. No, I think it's okay. I think that's about it. And then let's see. Go back in here. What else I was talking about here? Oh yeah, the tier line. So the tier line is super simple. It has. I had before this one corner here that actually would blend with this guy here, but it's not necessary. You can actually eliminate those polys completely. What happens with the tier line is that in fact we have that line going under and over as well. If you want to go very precious with it, you can actually build the superior part as well, because there is liquid, right, like between the eyeball and the eyelid. So naturally, if you have a shot from the bottom, you should see something like this as well. So if you want to do that, I might do that for this model as well, so it looks nicer if I have shots from below. But I try to keep a very simple object like that. So when I actually subdivide it, right, I get the little ramp like that. I want to make sure that I'm going to show you this when I start like adding this to the model itself. But normally what I do, I make the object live, like the face is going to be live. And then I can snap those vertices here right against the eyelid, like this front row right here, right? It's going to be snapped against it. And then I'm going to go with those guys here, and I'm going to make the eyeball live. And then the eyeball, I'm going to snap this one to the very transition between the eyeball and the eyelids. I'm going to make this one like snap to it. And then this one here, I'm going to go up, also snapping to the eyeball. So at the end, you're going to have like, it's almost like a 90-degree like that, right? But then, of course, when you smooth it out, then you get that nice little ramp like that. And that's all I need for the nice reflections in the eyes. Let's see if I have one here I can show. Let's see, I have my Google. Let's just go here. And Google Drive. See if I have some in there. Easier to see. Okay, let's try something like that. So this guy here, for example, right? This is like from the Rick Baker model. So basically, like you see, like it's just that little ramp right there. And it wasn't even like completely perfect against the surface. I think for the Dick Smith, I think it did a better job with it. But it's still, you know, it's like you catch just enough highlight in there to look nice. And of course, like you don't want it to be completely emptied of textures, right? So what I'm gonna do with this, I'm gonna show you what I have plugged in here, which is a very basic noise in Maya. So basically like the tier lines right here. And then you can see the geometry here. I have like specular is at 0.76, like similar to what I said before, like so not super specky. The roughness is slightly more rough than the eye itself, but I don't know, maybe I like that. That was not super, you know, it's like a glass, right? And then the index of refraction, for some reason I have it 1.6. I think I increased it for some reason, but I'm not sure why. In the past I had like 1.36 that was matching the cornea. But then seems like, I don't know, maybe I got better result with 1.6 in there for some reason. But let's see, transmission, I have like fully transmission, right? Oh, and also, if you go to the properties of the object, if you look at Arnold tab, you're gonna see the opaque is off, right? So that's off because it's a transparent object. So transmission is all the way up to 1, so completely transparent. Subsurface 0, no needed. Code is at 0. Sheen at 0, air at 0, and then for the bump map, let's see if I have any displacement. So I have no displacement map plugged to it. I think I had displacement at some point and I thought it was overkill, so I just plugged it as a bump map. So the bump map I have in here is the noise from Maya itself, which is the regular noise you can get. And then what I did, like those are the values I'm using right here, so it's kind of broad. So it's like 0, 1, 0.091, then 2.812, 3, then time. Those are the settings you guys can copy. You have the video in there. And then let's see down here, nothing else. Let's see if I have anything in the color balance. Just alpha is luminous because it's black and white. And that's about it. So for the coordinates, let's see if I have it multiplied. No, it's just one time. So that doesn't repeat, it's just one time. And then for the UVs, we can look at here and see what we have. Again, super simple. It's just a line like that. And yeah, so that's basically what it's doing. You know, it's like it's taking almost a complete like space in there, but it's just like, you know, it's like not taking the space, but I mean like it's almost as wide as the UV dim, the UDIM. And those noise settings should do it. So when you render just that, let's see, because right now we don't have anything in the back, so you're gonna see some reflection and refraction at the same time. Let's see what's rendering here. It should look a little weird. Yeah, you see, like it just have like small breakup, but it's almost like a lamina, right? And that when it's blended together with the eye and everything, it looks very sweet. But here is actually calculating the refraction and everything, so it's gonna look weird. It's gonna look like a piece of metal, right? But once it's against the eyeball, it's gonna look okay. We can actually move in here. It doesn't have a match because I still have to, you know, let's put it in here just to see how it looks like. But I have to match the eyeball correctly first. If I do it like that, let's see how it looks like in the render. See if we can catch something. And then against the eyelid, right? So you're gonna get a nicer effect in there. That's basically what I'm getting right here. If I do it this way. It's very subtle. You see like there's some intersection in there. So basically like if I have my model fully posed, I can actually make that line blend, like match perfectly the eyeball. And then in that case, we have it pretty good, you know. But yeah, it's gonna add like a nice little reflection right there at the border. At the end of the day, it's gonna sell it. So that's it about like the eye, my configurations and stuff in Maya. We can go back to it, you know, eventually when we are doing the blending everything again, like I said. But let's look at this guy here now. So let's hide this Caruncula. And let's see what I did with the crazy brush stuff. It looks so weird without the teeth. It looks weird with teeth too, but without teeth is extra weird. And then, so again, let's put side by side here. So let's bring my render. So that's the render I have with that nice little HDRI that I point you guys to. And then if I bring my ZBrush to the side here, that's the guy right there. And then let's explore a little bit this the pore work. So let's turn off this thing. Let's just isolate my model, just this poly group, and let's go HD and see what we have. A lot of the skin is still very plain, especially the ones on the side of the face. You see the neck's gonna have a reverse effect because I'm gonna start adding the bumps, right? Like instead of like having the pores going down, I'm gonna have a bunch of bumps in here for the ingrowth hair and all that stuff. And but I normally use like I do like a basic pass because I want to make sure that this entire area is completely covered before I can break symmetry, right? So once I had the pores all in place, even if I don't have any wrinkles or anything like that in place, if the pores are in place, I start breaking symmetry. Because for the wrinkles, it's hard for you to actually put some wrinkles in both sides and look natural. You know, it's like normally you can tell like right away what's kind of matching. So a few of them, maybe like at the beginning, I did a little bit in there, but from that point on, it's going to be always symmetrical. So I have to rework like this entire like this side here, right? Like it just started. But in terms of having the pores in place, all those guys are in place, but now I have to go through that process of adding the wrinkles, right? Like connecting the dots, like I said. You're gonna see stuff like, for example, around here, right? I did some of that, for example, like getting some of those pores and actually going one to one and then breaking the line and going to the next one, just to create this impression that is actually connecting those dots, right? And then to add some directionality, what I did was using the same brush that I had shown you guys before. Let me just bring this one here, which was the skin random, right? This one here, that little one that you're familiar with. And then here, actually going and doing that shebang, going like that, right? So for example, here, can actually just build towards that and add directionality. Same with this area right here. We had those tiny little micro details like that, right? Around here, for example, I can start adding some direction as well, just by doing that. And of course, like you do in a way, and then you kind of come a little bit more of a diagonal and do it that way as well, just so they are not completely parallel to each other, you know? And then you can actually go with a little bit bigger version of it like that. And then I created this direction in here with those guys. And then, of course, carefully, you can go like pore by pore later, and you can actually stretch them. You know, it's like by using any brush you want to carve them with, similar to what I did with those pores around here, right? I would start like kind of like changing direction in there, just by digging them like this. But what I was saying before is like, you guys are using like those pores and everything. You're making everything very plain, like I'm doing on the side here, right? You can tell straight away that's very plain like that. But as soon as you start adding more stuff to it, right? Like this little direction brush that I just did, or even if you use the same brush with the circular motion, like I said before, for example, like in this area here, right? Let's do this, look. This is a little bit too strong. Let's do a little bit smaller and a little bit less strong. So let's try maybe intensity of like 6, something like that. So if I go in this area here, if I do that, it's going to start adding more breakup to it. Make it even smaller, like that. If I do this, for example, yeah, it's more breakup, but then I can go to each one of those pores and pick a bunch of them and make them deeper. And if I have to sculpt them again, I can just go and pick my single pore in there and do it. But then I have this little, let's see, multi-pores here. Let's see if that's the one I created. Yeah. So this is the new one. It looks like this. The one I just showed you guys in the plane, right? So basically, like with this thing, I can actually cover large areas, but I'm actually still sculpting in between them because I created it's a circle, right? And it's not like I have a fade at the edges. I have just a circle. So if I do something like this around here, right? I'm gonna pull it like that. You see, like, I don't want to intersect with those next ones, the neighbors in there. So what I'm doing, I'm actually creating like those little circles all over the place. For example, I go here, right? But I leave a little bit of a gap that actually I can go and actually this one is still adding some fade and I shouldn't have a fade. Let's try that. Let radio, if the radio fade is on, yeah, I have a 3 in here. I'm just off. So basically, like, I'm gonna do that. Oh, I think I added just because it's actually going all the way and actually eating a little bit and creating a square. So I think I'm gonna add a little radio fade anyway. So 2, let's try that. So that, and then trying to avoid intersection. But for example, if I go to the next one, I'm gonna still leave a little gap, you know. So for example, from here, and try to keep like similar scale as well. So this in-between stuff, I go with my single pore and I tweak it and fill up those areas. But then I'm actually doing this, you know. It's like, I know that Palomita, she was doing like a roll brush. That's kind of cool. But I don't know if it works like when you're trying to get it, you know, to really look more natural. But yeah, this way I was able to cover a very large area just by using those little circles and then filling the in-betweens, you know. So I was able to cover most of the face actually doing that way. So yeah, at this point, that's what I have here. I mean, like in this area here, I did the opposite, right? I first carved the wrinkles, those ones in the nose, and then I came with one single pore, and I actually started like putting them in line. So let's see, we tested here a little bit smaller, like 30. And then I would kind of like do the opposite, like the reverse, right? So because I'm connecting the dots, when I do the opposite way, I'm actually kind of following the line and then putting them kind of like in a line like that. And eventually bringing from time to time, but you know, it's like trying to keep a line, but kind of like you kind of like that zigzag pattern, right? So basically like doing this kind of stuff. And then if I find areas where the blend wasn't very successful, I try to keep looking around. If I find area, for example, this one here, it looks a little bit smooth, right? I can actually reinforce those wrinkles. And like I said, like there's so much variation in the face that sometimes you can actually get one wrinkle and make much deeper like that. And then from time to time you pick one, you know, so I can really make deeper. And then eventually with this, and plus all those other passes that I demonstrated before with the noise, you know, it's like, remember the noise I used with the elastic combined with it, just to actually protect the detail already sculpted, but adding all that, you know, variation to the depth, you know, so you can do that kind of stuff. And then on top of that, we're gonna have the whole pass, including the bumps, right? I have some bumps in here, but this is gonna be much more bumpy once I start adding those pimples and things like that. You know, it's still very plain, but like it's like basically like step by step, you're gonna start making this skin more and more complex. But at the end of the day, when you render it and you have everything blended with a nice shader and things like that, you know, it's like you start seeing some interesting results. You know, it's like things breaking up. This is using the micro displacement we put there, so we get this tiny little specks. And yeah, it's like eventually things gonna start coming, you know, to place together. But yeah, the chin, for example, I did that whole area of the chin here. Let's see how the chin looks like. So I started sculpting like that, right? So I got all those little bumps in there, and then I start adding some directionality as well, like bringing some from the side, and then, you know, carving some of them in there. Some of them are going to be much more subtle. I'm planning to actually smooth out some of those areas, especially like if you have this stretch happening here with, you know, with his smile. So some of this stuff is going to get more stretched, and probably the relief is going to be smaller as well. but it might be overkill because most of this is going to be covered with beard, right? So I have to think about that as well, because you know, it's like pick my battles if I want to do that or not, right? I don't know, anything I didn't cover about this? I mean, like any questions about how the model got to this stage right now? I mean, like I'm going to be talking about the color for sure. We're going to go through, we have another class probably tomorrow. It's going to be just texture. So just going to be texturing the face with polypaint. But then other than that, all the maps I'm using here are the maps we did in class, or at least I demonstrated in class. And all the techniques I'm using here, nothing is new for you guys. It's just like using basically like a mix of all of them. You know, it's like, okay, I have those brushes I can mix with each other and then add the stretch. But all of them are basically like me sculpting by hand. Like we did this eye here mostly during that class, right? We did most of the eye stuff in, live here. Was kind of similar approach, you know.
Hey, Kris. Do you
Yeah.
hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Just a question about the elastic one, the one that you're puffing the in between and giving volumes in between the pores, basically.
Yes.
So I remember it was the elastic. That's fine, but did you do anything specific to it? Yeah, if you can run this through, that would be.
Yeah. So like the elastic brush, I use like a low intensity, right? Like let's say like 20 or something, and then one thing that I try to do with it, if you try to just like go zigzagging with the elastic brush, it's gonna make like a very weird result. So I normally try to do this. Look at this. Let me just crank it here so we can see what it does, right? So if I go like side to side, it makes this wobble kind of weird thing, right? So what I try to do, I just try to go like, for example, like in single strokes like this, like side to side, and then side to side again, side to side, like building the volume like that, you know? So if I do this with a very low intensity version, cozy brush, a little more. Instead of like going back and forth with the brush, you just go one direction and you release it and go again, you know? So I'm gonna go to 30, something like that. And then around this area here, I can do that. So bring it like that, and then bring it like that again, and again, and then again. You know, it's like kind of like go like just one side to the other side, but without actually going back. So you can actually build up all those forms. But then when it comes to the pores themselves, to add variation, what I did was actually using a spray. And then I think I used one of those alphas. Let's try like maybe like 37. No, there's another one here that I used. Let's try 37, maybe a little smaller. Just crank put the curvature a little bit smaller like that. And then let's put like very high. Let's see what we get. Yeah, very high, you get that kind of stuff, right? So let's make it very small intensity. Like, let's see, 5. 5 is too small. Let's try it higher, 10. Still a little small, 20. Yeah, 20 starts showing a little bit. Let's get even higher, like 33. Yeah, so in that case here, instead of like going up, I can actually use this one here and just go down. And then let's see, I'm at 34 right now. So if I do this, you start adding a little bit more of a, yeah, it's kind of like a little bit more organic, right? Especially like the side of the face right here, that's very, very blend. I can get some of those. It's kind of like a cheat. I mean, like I could go like one by one and kind of like, okay, let me, you know, like really pick which ones are gonna go. But then we're gonna go that precise, right? This one should be you know, enough to actually add some interesting variation, you know. Just by doing that, like I'm going in circles right here, you're actually adding a little bit of that chowder kind of effect in here, which is cool, you know, it's like the micro scars and stuff. And then of course you can reverse it. So I'm just going in circles here, just like adding all this crap. And then I'm gonna go reverse it and then bring some bumps up like that. So all this stuff can help, you know, it's like to actually break up all this stuff. And now when it comes to the neck, I'm gonna have to actually find a brush that works the best here for me. But for now, maybe this one is not gonna do it too much. Let's see, let's try with 45. Yeah, something like that. I'm probably gonna have to use like a small kind of, you know, point instead of like, yeah, otherwise it's gonna get too big here. and get like some. It's interesting, and I was like, another way to do it, obviously, is if you go back in resolution, right? You can just go like back in resolution in here, and then have something like that, or a little higher, maybe like that. And then you can come with some other brush, like instead of like the elastic, you can come with a regular brush, like a standard with the spray. And then it shouldn't deform, like destroy the forms at the very top that much. So you can actually go, and do it here. But yeah, something like that. I'm probably gonna approach like those bumps around here similarly. Yeah. Have to crapify his face a lot. That's what's missing for our faces, It's like it's just add more bumps and bruises and things, because the pores, you guys are getting it. Eventually we're gonna get all in the same page, I guess. But yeah, don't feel bad if you need to cheat and create some arrays and help you out. I would not encourage to do that too much in those hero areas, like those ones. I would keep like doing manually around here, so you can have more control. But then the areas that are less important, for example, forehead or something like that, you can go with an array, and then once you add the wrinkles and all the directionality of some of those guys here, it should look much, much nicer.
Yeah, and another question. So I'm sculpting on the one that it's symmetrical. I just spoke with Paloma, and she said she saw the same thing. So once we do the work and the pores on the symmetrical, and as soon as I switch to the one, the morph target, so basically there the detail seems a little bit flatter and a bit more lacking volume.
Oh, really? It's like it's a very different pose, like.
It's not a very different pose. My head is just tilted, and I haven't even added distortion or anything. But as soon as I do the switch, basically on the before going into HD, so I can preview how the detail looks like.
Yeah.
You know how even out of HD, you can see on the, let's say, non-HD geometry that you have like a track of the pores, and you see them. Well, as soon as I switch to the morph target, I see no pores, and when I enter the HD, then I can see it.
That's so weird, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, like I remember like having something that in the past that the head was in a completely different space. It was kind of like was far away from their origin. It wasn't like in the same space. But anything
this one is just right next to it, like you basically tweak the neck a little bit and tilt it. So yeah, I wonder why. But basically, I could have probably tell as soon as I didn't see the pores on the non-HD geometry. I was like, oh my god, let's see now. So I entered, the detail was there, but everything was a bit washed out. So yeah, I'm just thinking.
There's a problem with ZBrush in the past that I know. This one was recorded. It was basically like you would enter HD and do all the work, and then you would get out of HD and you would smooth it out a little bit, like the detail would smooth a little bit. And then every time you went in and out HD, you would lose a little bit more detail until it was completely smooth. But then they fixed that like a couple of more versions ago, probably like, I would say like maybe 3 or 4 versions ago was completely fixed. But this one about like losing detail, I don't remember having, it's like maybe because my stuff is not like in a completely different position. It's like it's fairly close to this. For example, like some of the busts I was working before, instead of like tilting the head itself, I keep the head in the same spot and I tilt the rest of the body. You know what I mean?
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So I fake that pose by keeping the head completely straight, so I can keep working fairly symmetrically, right?
Yeah.
But then, for example, I tilt the neck and the shoulders. So that fawn that I sculpted, it was basically like the face is symmetrical and it's completely facing you, but the rest of the body is not. So when I pose it in Maya, then it looks like it's twisting his head, but it's actually not. So I don't know, maybe.
For me, it won't work because there is a horse and body and armor and so much. So
that's
like, right. Maybe.
Yeah, you have a lot of stuff going on in there. What if you did like you kept the file that you sculpt like symmetrically, right? But then you render asymmetrically. Basically, like you have your base mesh in Maya that's all completely posed and everything. because I'm not sure, man. Like,
yeah, and I just apply the displacement, right?
yeah,
Maybe even like,
yeah.
I was thinking about
But
this.
it's kind of shitty though, because you want to make sure you're seeing the model pose, right? Because you want to see the whole scene. Like, yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that
Well,
sucks because in that case, I mean, like, I wonder if you're gonna have to do it symmetrically. You know, it's like that would suck.
exactly. Yeah, Carlos is doing this one, but that's, I mean, that was the reason I wanted to symmetrize it so I can avoid that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'll try bringing this somehow, like maybe exporting the geometry with the non-HD, like for morph target, and then I don't know, I'll see, and maybe doing a blend or something. I'll see, and yeah, and I'll let you
Yeah,
know.
it's hard because like I said, I mean, like if you're working for production, right? You're basically like you're keeping the model completely symmetrical, like for the long as possible, and then of course like the pose is gonna come in animation or whatever, right? And the scenes they're gonna animate it. But the way I maintain my models at work, they're basically symmetrical, unless like it's a model that has like 3 legs and on one side, and then it has another 2, and the other one's asymmetrical, like the topology. But if the model is symmetrical, like digital doubles and stuff, I always keep like symmetrical, right? And
Yeah,
so it is tricky because it's almost like you have to put together your little pipeline at home, you know, if you are planning to do more extreme stuff. For example, the Hellboy I'm sculpting, the plan was to actually pose him in like multiple different poses. But the thing is, like I kept him completely symmetrical, right? The model is symmetrical, but then my intention is to rig it and then create those poses and then have everything follow it. But I didn't go for like a fully customized, like fully sculpted, like in pose, you know? So I don't know.
yeah, yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks.
Yeah, man, no problem. Yeah, it's a chase, isn't it? Like, I mean, like this thing about like figuring out our own pipelines and how those things fit in with it. But yeah, there's always a way. That's the beauty about like working with ZBrush. There's always a way to figure those things out. But yeah, it's like really like problem solving is really the time consuming part, you know. That's I think the most valuable thing about this class. It's for example, like a lot of those settings that I'm using. It's not like you guys need to do a lot of R&D, you know. At least even if it's not perfect for your needs, you have a ballpark. So for example, like you get like something, okay, the skin shader, if I start with those values, I'm gonna get something that's fairly decent already. So I can push it that way or that way, but at least you guys are not scrambling to do something from scratch like I was, you know. I was like learning from scratch everything. So that's a nice little bonus in there for you guys. But anyway, I think we are on time, and I hope you guys enjoyed today, like the eye stuff. And like I said, like we can always go back and forth, especially when you start, you know, blending, putting together all the pieces of the puzzle. And then tomorrow we're gonna jump into texturing and do a lot of texturing by hand, which is always fun. So sweet. Thank you guys, and as usual, you know, it's like I'm really appreciating the company every time, and then having lots of laughs in the group and the chat is pretty funny.
Thank you, Kris. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, guys.